Hi everybody, I'm Chris from Discount Aquarium Fish and Reef in beautiful Tempe, Arizona. Today we're going to be talking about how to seal an acrylic tank that has a seam leak. Very easy process. First to talk a little bit about products used for working with acrylic. This is Weld-On 4. Weld-On 4 is what I call a wicking weld-on. It's water thin and made to wick into cracks and fuse acrylic back together. Another type of weld-on we use is Weld-On 16. Weld-On 16 is thicker. It's actually used to bond acrylic panels back together. It also can be used for sealing bulkhead holes in an acrylic aquarium by welding a piece of acrylic over those holes. It also should be used when you're baffling an acrylic aquarium. Baffles have to be cut precisely because you don't caulk the acrylic. It needs to have a flat bond together, so you can't have a gap between the panels. Sometimes people use silicone when they're putting in acrylic baffles. Not a good process because silicone eventually releases from the acrylic. It's more for working with glass aquarium repair or glass aquarium baffling. You don't use acrylic baffles to go into glass tanks, and you don't use glass baffles to go into acrylic tanks because there's a different product required to bond materials together, and it's not efficient to try and bond glass to acrylic. Again, the silicone sticks to the glass, but it will release from the acrylic over time. With that said, the first step when you have a leaking acrylic aquarium, of course, is to clean that aquarium thoroughly. Once that's done, I like to use a small amount of rubbing alcohol in the seams. That helps to evacuate out any water that may be in the seams. But if you have the time, you want to take your time, put that aquarium out in the sun, let it dry for a day, because it's very important that we don't have any water in those seams that we're going to be fusing back together. In a pinch, if you're in a hurry, you can use a blow dryer, blow out those seams, get them nice and clean, and then you can begin your repair job. For doing a repair on seams, first off, you're going to want to know if that seam is completely separated. If it is completely separated and you can pull the two pieces of acrylic apart, or there's a gap present there, I like to take a flathead screwdriver, stick it between the gap. Then we go ahead and use Weld-On 16, which is thicker, and we squirt the 16 into the gap between those two panels, and then we pull the screwdriver out. If they don't pinch fully together, a clamp can be used, or the tank can be weighted with bricks or something like that, so that that seam gets squeezed together and can get a good weld with the Weld-On 16 thicker weld-on. Generally, the seam is not going to be completely separated. There's a minor separation that's allowing water to leak out of the tank. In that case, it's a fairly easy repair. I use a spacer like a piece of wood or bricks, and I take the aquarium and I tip it at an angle like so. That way we can get a good seal into that seam with the wicking weld on, and that's very easily done. We take the wicking weld on. These will usually come with an applicator of some type. I'm going to use a disposable pipette in order to apply the weld on to the gap. Also, weld-on can be fairly hard to find locally. I always like to support the local small businesses because we are one, but generally I buy this online because it can be hard to find locally. That said, we take our applicator, we reach into that container. I like to tip it back while I'm still in the container because sometimes it likes to squirt out a little bit from this applicator. A little bit goes a long way. You can see I have a little bit in the bulb right there. I take my applicator, I have it facing up here so I'm not drizzling as I go into the tank. I come down to the crack that I'm going to be sealing. I just place the applicator on that seam, and I slowly squeeze out a little bit of the weld on all the way across that seam, and that seam is done. What happens then is we just need to wait a few minutes. Weld on is very quick acting, and then we're going to take that tank, and since we're sealing one seam, you want to seal them all when you're at it because it's very easy, regardless of the size of the tank. At that point, after waiting a few minutes, you would tip the tank up at this angle, go ahead and seal that back seam, and then you would tip the tank up at an angle like such, and go ahead and seal the side seams. And same thing with the back seam. You would tip the tank at this angle, seal that back seam, and this tank happens to have a bent piece of acrylic, which many do, which composes the front and the sides. So obviously we won't need to wick this front seam. And that is how you go ahead and seal up an acrylic aquarium. Hope you've enjoyed this video and you see how easy it is to do. If for any reason after you sealed this tank you have a leak still, I like to take a small piece of acrylic, 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch, and I actually use the weld on 16 and I glue that 1/4 inch, or I shouldn't use the word glue because you're actually fusing the acrylic together. Where I have that leak, I go a few inches past the leak on each side and I actually glue that into the corner seam. And then of course, once that dries 10 or 15 minutes, I go ahead and use my wicking weld on around all the edges to wick into any pinhole or anything that might remain. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.